The Humming in the Woods, A Tale of Fear and the Unknown. Chapter 1. The Safe Suburbs. Growing up in the quiet suburbs of northern Pennsylvania, I'd always believed nothing exciting or dangerous ever happened here. It was the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked at night, where neighbors waved to each other every morning. But in the summer of 2006, my perception of safety was shattered. What happened that year still haunts me to this day. What's worse, it was real. I was 17 at the time, spending my summer hiking and taking photos for a photography contest at school. The forests around our town were sprawling and dense, crisscrossed by trails that seemed endless. These trails were my sanctuary. I knew them like the back of my hand, or so I thought. Chapter 2. The Fire Tower. It started innocently enough. On a late June morning, my best friend Jared and I planned a day-long hike to reach an abandoned fire lookout tower deep in the woods. The tower was legendary among locals. People told stories of ghostly figures and strange noises, but we'd always dismissed them as campfire tales. For us, it was about the challenge of the hike and the incredible view from the top. We packed sandwiches, water, and a disposable camera. Around 8 a.m., we set off, excited and joking about what we might find. The first few miles were uneventful. Birds chirped, sunlight filtered through the canopy, and the smell of pine hung heavy in the air. But as we ventured deeper, things began to feel off. The trail seemed narrower than I remembered, as if the forest were closing in around us. The air grew cooler, and the usual sounds of the woods, birds, insects, rustling leaves, seemed to fade away. Jared, who was usually the fearless one, started looking over his shoulder. I laughed it off, trying to lighten the mood. "Scared of Bigfoot, Jared?" I teased. "No, but something feels weird," he replied. "Do you hear that?" I stopped and listened. At first I heard nothing, just silence. But then there it was, a faint humming sound, low and mechanical, coming from somewhere ahead. It didn't belong in the forest. We joked nervously about aliens and government experiments, but neither of us wanted to admit how uneasy we felt. We pressed on. After another mile, we reached a clearing where the fire tower loomed above us. It was taller than I'd imagined, rusted and weathered by decades of neglect. The humming noise was louder now, but we couldn't pinpoint its source. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Chapter 3. The Clearing. We climbed the tower cautiously, the metal stairs creaking under our weight. At the top, the view was breathtaking. The endless green forest stretched out in every direction, broken only by a distant ridge. But my eyes were drawn to something else. A strange clearing in the woods, perfectly circular and devoid of trees. It was about a mile away, and it stood out starkly against the dense forest. Jared saw it too. "What the hell is that?" he asked. "I don't know. Maybe logging," I guessed, though I wasn't convinced. Something about it felt wrong. The humming noise seemed louder when we looked in its direction. "Let's check it out," Jared said, already climbing down the tower. I hesitated but followed. Curiosity had gotten the better of us. As we made our way toward the clearing, the forest grew even quieter. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive. Then we found the first sign that something was very wrong. A deer carcass, fresh but untouched by scavengers. Its eyes were wide open, its mouth frozen in a silent scream. There were no visible wounds, no blood. "This is messed up," Jared whispered. We considered turning back, but the clearing was just ahead. When we reached it, my heart sank. The ground was covered in ash, as if a massive fire had burned here, but the surrounding trees were untouched. In the center of the clearing stood a metal hatch, partially buried in the ground, with no markings or indications of what it was. Chapter 4. The hatch Jared was the first to approach. "It looks like some kind of bunker," he said, running his fingers over the surface. "Help me open it." "Are you insane?" I shot back. "What if it's dangerous? What if it's private property?" But Jared was already trying to lift the hatch. Reluctantly, I helped him. It was heavy and rusted, but eventually it gave way with a groan. A foul, metallic smell wafted up from the dark hole beneath. A ladder descended into the earth, disappearing into darkness. "We have to go down," Jared said, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and excitement. No way, I replied. This is crazy. We should report this. To who? The cops? They'll just say we're trespassing. Come on, don't be a wuss. Against my better judgment, I followed him. We used our phone flashlights to light the way, the beams cutting through the darkness. The ladder was longer than expected, and my hands were slick with sweat by the time we reached the bottom. The space below was larger than I'd imagined, like an underground facility. The walls were lined with old monitors, switches, and machinery that looked decades out of date. But the humming noise was deafening here, reverberating in my chest. Jared moved ahead, exploring with wide-eyed curiosity, while I hung back, every nerve in my body screaming to leave. Chapter 5. The Man in the Dark. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the chamber. We froze, our flashlights darting around wildly. I grabbed Jared's arm, ready to bolt, but then a voice called out, "Who's there?" It wasn't a shout. It was calm, almost conversational, but it sent chills down my spine. Jared called back, we're just exploring. We didn't mean to trespass." There was no response, just the sound of footsteps growing closer. That's when we saw him. A man, or at least what looked like a man. He was tall, wearing a suit that looked like it belonged in the 1950s, but his face, it was wrong. Too smooth, too perfect, like a mannequin brought to life. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. Before we could respond, the lights flickered, and a loud mechanical screech filled the air. The man tilted his head unnaturally, like a bird, and then everything went dark. Jared grabbed my arm and we ran, blindly fumbling our way back to the ladder. I could hear something behind us, something fast and heavy, but I didn't dare look back. We reached the ladder and scrambled up, slamming the hatch shut behind us. We ran without stopping, crashing through the forest until we reached the main trail. Only then did we look back. The forest was silent again, but we didn't stop to rest. We ran all the way home. Chapter 6. The Disappearance. Jared wanted to call the police, but I convinced him not to. What could we say? That we found a secret bunker and were chased by a mannequin man? No one would believe us. We agreed never to go back, never to tell anyone what we saw. But the story doesn't end there. A week later, Jared disappeared. He told his parents he was going for a hike, but he never came home. Search parties scoured the woods for days, but no trace of him was ever found. His disappearance was ruled as an accident, but I knew better. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Forest. Months later, rumors began to circulate around town. Other hikers reported hearing the same strange humming deep in the woods. One man claimed he'd seen strange lights flickering among the trees at night. An older woman said she'd found a trail of scorched earth leading nowhere, as if something had been dragged through the forest. The stories were always vague, always dismissed as nonsense. But I knew better. Chapter 8. The Visitor. 2 years after Jared's disappearance, something happened that still makes my blood run cold. Late one night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a low humming noise outside my window. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder. I looked outside but saw nothing. Then in the distance near the tree line, I spotted a figure. It was tall and motionless, standing just beyond the reach of the streetlights. I blinked and it was gone. The next morning I found footprints in the dirt outside my window. They were large, too large to be human, and they ended abruptly as if whatever had made them had vanished into thin air. I didn't sleep for weeks after that. Chapter 9. The Lingering Nightmare. I've never been back to those woods. I moved away after high school, but the memory still haunts me. Sometimes I hear that humming noise in my dreams, and I wake up drenched in sweat. I've spent years trying to piece together what happened. I've searched online for answers, for anyone who might have experienced something similar, and every so often I come across a story that feels too familiar to ignore. A Reddit thread, a late-night conspiracy podcast, a blurry photograph of a circular clearing in the woods. The details vary, but the themes are always the same. The hum, the hatch, the figure that doesn't seem quite human. Whatever we stumbled upon is not unique to my town. It's out there, waiting. Chapter 10. The Final Return. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Against my better judgment, I returned to Pennsylvania and ventured back into the forest. The fire tower was still there, looming like a forgotten sentinel. The trail to the clearing felt longer, darker, as if the forest itself was warning me to turn back. But I pressed on. When I reached the clearing, the hatch was gone. In its place was a patch of disturbed earth, as if someone had buried it. But the humming noise, that low, mechanical hum, was still there, vibrating through the ground. I felt a cold sweat break out as I realized whatever was beneath the earth wasn't gone. It was still there, waiting. Chapter 11. The Shadow Organization. I began digging deeper into Jared's disappearance and the strange occurrences in the forest. I stumbled upon a collection of declassified government files that mentioned experiments conducted in the area during the 1950s. The documents spoke of electromagnetic testing, human subjects, and strange anomalies that defied scientific explanation. The most chilling part was a single line that read, "All findings are to remain buried," literally. A contact I met online, someone who claimed to be a former government contractor, warned me to stop digging. "They're still watching," he said. "Some things aren't meant to be uncovered." Chapter 12. The Final Encounter. Last month, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of the humming again. This time, it was deafening. My entire house seemed to vibrate. I looked out the window and saw the same figure from years ago, but this time it was closer, standing at the edge of my yard. My lights flickered, and for a moment, I swear I saw multiple figures standing behind it, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I've since moved again, to a different state, far from Pennsylvania. But the humming has followed me. Late at night, when everything is quiet, I sometimes hear it in the distance, growing louder. I don't know what it means, but I'm certain of one thing. Whatever we found that day in the woods has marked me, and it's not finished. Epilogue: Some secrets are meant to stay buried. I'll never forget Jared, the fire tower, or the man in the dark. These memories are etched into my mind like scars. I've tried to warn others, but the stories always sound too far-fetched, too much like a bad horror movie. Still, I hope this account reaches someone who might be thinking of exploring the forests of northern Pennsylvania. If you hear the hum, turn back. Some doors are meant to stay closed, and some secrets are meant to stay buried.